Hi everyone. In this bite-sized bit, we're going to discuss the best practices for documenting your Visual Studio projects. Let's go ahead and get started. For today's exercise, I've chosen the future value example that shows up in many of our class exercises and in many of these videos. So you may have seen this before. If not, it doesn't matter. We're just going to use it as a template for documentation. This is a project that collects monthly investment amounts, yearly interest rates, and number of years, and will output to the user how much money they'll have in the future. The code behind the scenes has two buttons, an exit button and a calculate button, and I've already filled in the code for the calculate button's method. We're going to go ahead and use this as a template to demonstrate the best practices for documenting our code. One thing that we're going to want to do with every one of our Visual Studio projects is add an internal comment header. And you can find this header in the coding standards document on eCampus. Once you find the header information, you can just copy and paste it from the PDF into your code. I typically paste my header information underneath the libraries at the top of my code, but before the namespace. If you want to paste this at the very top on line 1, that's certainly fine. As long as it's towards the top of your code, you're in good shape. After pasting the generic header, go ahead and edit it to match your personal information. So you can see in my example, I've edited the author, I've edited the course information, I've changed the name of the form. I've given my application a brief purpose, just a few lines of text. In our class, we don't need an initialize. We do need an input process output. So I've listed the input text boxes. I've briefly described the process that's going to occur since this is a fairly simple program. And I've listed the output text box. For this class, we also don't need a terminate. For all of our projects, we're going to include the Texas A&M Honor Code. We're expecting to see this header information in every project that you work on in class, whether it's an in-class exercise, a homework, a project, or an exam. So please get into the habit of copying and pasting either the header information from the coding standards document or your header information from previous projects into new projects and edit accordingly. Before we get into individual comment structures, let's talk a little bit about how our code is displayed on the screen. You may have noticed during previous exercises that we have these little minus signs appear in various points throughout our code. This allows us to collapse code or hide it from the screen while still keeping it in the actual code base. So after you've done something like your header information, if you'd like to collapse it so that it doesn't take up geographic space on your screen, please feel free to do so. Collapsing code does not change the functionality at all. It's still there. It will still run when necessary. It just takes up less space on your screen. I'm going to go ahead and collapse the using library at the very top. And I'm going to go ahead and collapse my header information now that I've properly filled it out. Let's talk a little bit about internal documentation. We're going to do two things with all of our code. The first thing we're going to do for all of our methods that we have created that are associated with buttons or labels or text boxes, or methods that we've created from scratch, is we're going to add what's called / or XML documentation. And it's very simple to add. Right above one of your methods, you can type a / not once, not twice, which is a normal comment, but 3 times. And you'll see, as soon as I type that third / that Visual Studio adds this / structure right above my method. For methods that are associated with trigger events, like button clicks, the only information that you need to fill in is the summary information. So here I'm going to add a little bit of documentation. This button closes the form. For user-defined methods, you may need to give more information about the parameters that are included in your method, but you may not. It depends on, again, how you've structured your various methods. The other thing that we're going to do throughout our code is add comments. Comments come in a couple of different forms. You can type a comment on a line of its own. So for instance, I can type a comment here in my exit button that says, the next line of code closes the form. I can also add comments to the end of a specific line of code. So after I've typed a semicolon, I can type 2 forward slashes, and then I can type this line of code closes the form. I probably wouldn't want to type both of these comments. The author of a program can pick and choose whichever form better suits their needs. I'm going to pause the video myself at this point to add the remaining comments to my code, and I'll return momentarily. And we're back. You can see that I've added triple slash notation to my second method, which was my btn calculate click. I typed a very brief summary for that triple slash notation, and then throughout the method I typed some comments. We've seen things like input, processing, and output in some of my other examples. I actually have an additional block of pre-processing that I added. I added some additional commentary about input. I added an additional comment in my for loop to remind myself of a bit of coding where I don't need to increment the counter inside the for loop because the for loop does it for me automatically. I also added a comment in my output about what the quote C quote means to remind myself that it's formatting my output as currency. You can add comments that are for you, the programmer, or for someone else who's examining the code, or for both. And you can add as many comments as you'd like. I've been teaching programming for more than 25 years, and I have never seen code that had too many comments or too much green. I've seen lots of code that hasn't had enough comments, and some of that code has been my own, where I've written great code but forgotten to properly comment it, and then come back to that code in the future and had trouble understanding what I was trying to do the first time I wrote that code. So make sure you add lots of comments to your code, not just for other people, but for future you. You'll appreciate it in the long run, I promise. Let's talk about one more thing that we can do with our code, which would be adding regions. I'm coming up to above my triple slash for my button clicks, and I'm going to add a region by typing # region, and then anything I want. In this case, I'm going to call it buttons. And then below my buttons, I'm going to come and type end region. This is another example of providing structure for us as the programmer that doesn't affect the functionality of our code. What it does is give us another collapsible area. So if I want to, I can now click on this new ± button that appears next to region buttons and collapse all of the code that is relevant to clicking of buttons inside my form. I have two of them. I have an exit button and a calculate button, and I have put the code for both of them inside that region. You never have to add regions to your code, but for organization purposes and for structural purposes, sometimes they're handy. So feel free to use regions as liberally or as sparsely as you'd like. It's up to personal preference. That's it for this example of internal documentation. Thanks for watching. See you next time.